All right, we have a new question to tackle today, and the significance of a new question is not just the information associated with the specific question, but this is a whole different concept of learning that we haven't yet encountered. So let me explain to you what I mean. We're on page 10. We're now going to ask who authored our Mishnah. It sounds like such an arbitrary question. Like, what's the difference? What's the difference who authored our Mishnah?
I thought that question at the beginning.
You'd think, except that logically it belongs exactly here, because once we understand the context, then we understand the context. In other words, the reason you think that this should have been the first question, who is the author of our Mishnah, is because you think that the question is, who is the author of our Mishnah? But just because the question is framed as who is the author of our Mishnah does not mean that that is actually the question. In other words, what I'm saying is, what we want to work out over here is, what are the principles that the Mishnah is teaching us? See, let's go through this. What did we do so far? So far we learned what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah tells us that there's a conflict. We're looking to resolve a conflict. The conflict involves a tallis. And for the umpteenth time, we have clarified that a tallis has nothing to do with shul. Instead, the tallis we're describing over here is a cloak. The cloak, so whoever's going to listen to this recording is going to wonder what on earth is that crackling in the background the whole way through the shir. It's the cloak, exactly. It's the cloak. So now that I've done it, whoever's listening to the shir is only going to hear the crackling from now. So we started off by saying there's a conflict. What's the conflict? Two people land up both believing that they are the owners of this cloak. And the reason that happened is part of our question. We don't know how that happened. But what we do know is, in the absence of witnesses and in the absence of any party backing down, we have to have a solution. So the courts have to be able to manage this process. And the Mishnah's advice is, what the courts need to do is make each guy take an oath. An oath is a very serious business. And once they take that oath, then we're going to split the value of this talus equally between the two of them. That's the first case, and we're only going to focus on the first case for now. The Gemorah, up until here, said that first case may actually not be as straightforward as you thought, and we landed up saying that it's actually two different scenarios, although they both have the same halachic implication and application. So what that means is, scenario number one is, the two people each claim, we found this random cloak in the middle of the street. I'm the guy who found it first, versus the other person saying, I'm the guy who found it first. Nobody's willing to back down. The second scenario is, and this is a little bit more difficult initially to understand, but the second scenario is that the two people say, listen, I bought this thing first, and the other guy says, not even first, I bought this thing, and the other person says, I bought this thing. Now that we've done that, now we understand what case the Mishnah is talking about, or in this case, cases the Mishnah is talking about. Only once we have that information can we now say, who is the author of the Mishnah? Because the question is not, tell me the name of who is the author of the Mishnah. The question is, tell me which rabbi believes in the principles that led to this Mishnah. Because this Mishnah tells you, when there's a conflict that cannot be resolved due to lack of witnesses, the solve is, make them swear. Who's the rabbi who teaches that principle? Now, how are we going to do this? There's no name in the Mishnah. How are we going to work this out? The only way to work this out is a process of elimination. And this process of elimination is, and it's going to frustrate you a little bit, it's not necessarily going to leave us with one answer. In other words, let me explain why it's, so that you don't get too frustrated. Explain why that is. Here's the most updated copy. We're on page 10. So let me explain to you why this is. Do you remember very early on in our Gemorah journey, we spoke about the idea that as much as Gemorah has debate, the goal of Gemorah is resolution. Or to put it differently, as much as Gemorah has different opinions, the objective of Gemorah is to illustrate how they're not really different opinions. So the best thing for us is if you could say, this person said his statement because he was focused on this angle of the case, and that person said his statement because he was focused on that angle of the case, they're not actually arguing in principle. Let me explain to you what I mean. Let's use an example, because it's usually relatable when there's an example. So let's say you have two people. One person says, you can never, under any circumstances, drive on Shabbos. And the other person says, because one of the most powerful ways that you could support your position is to quote a first-hand story of a reliable individual, ideally a great sage. The second person says, I saw Rabbi so-and-so driving on Shabbos. Now, at this point, it looks to me like there's a massive debate, like there's a huge contradiction here, because the one person is quoting the law and the other person is saying, and the big rabbi does differently to that law. Now, the easy fix is, everybody understands what the easy fix is. How do you resolve this debate?
What was he doing?
What was who doing? Right, where was he going? And?
To save a life.
Exactly. He was driving to the hospital. It was an emergency. Now I realize there is no debate over here. There's no debate whatsoever. You are not allowed to drive on Shabbos. And you have to override Shabbos in order to save a life. There's no contradiction. So that's what I want to do. It's obviously a very extreme example where you can tell immediately how those two opinions are in no way a contradiction. That's really what I want to try and achieve every single time that there is a debate in the Gemorah and certainly in the Mishnah. Now, if there is a debate in the Mishnah will tell us that there's a debate. So the Mishnah might, for example, say, here's a scenario. Beis Hillel rule X, Beis Shammai rule Y. Okay, now I know that's the case, and these are the two opinions. And then the Gemara can debate and determine, what that means that there are these two opinions. Or it might be Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda having a three-way argument. It's also possible. How many names were listed in our Mishnah? None. There were no names in our Mishnah. There were no sages quoted in our Mishnah. So if there is no name quoted in our Mishnah, what does that tell you? There's no debate. It must be a universally accepted principle. Must be. Because if there was another opinion, they'd tell us. So if there's no other name in this Mishnah, if there's no name at all in this Mishnah, that implies this is a universally accepted approach to this case. So what's the case? Two people, equal arguments, both are totally unmoving, intransigent. They're not willing to surrender their position. There are no witnesses. It must be a universally accepted principle that in this case, the only thing to do is administer an oath and see either they back down or they don't, in which case they each get half of what they claimed. Must be universal. There is no debate recorded. Now the Gemorah has to audit that. The Gemorah has to say, okay, you're proposing that every single sage in that whole period of the Mishnah agreed with this universal principle. Let's fact check that. So in our case, we're going to bring up three sages and say, from what each of these three sages, from what they have said in a different context, in what seems to be a very similar case, I would not imagine they'd agree with this universal principle. And that's what we mean when we say, who's the author of the Mishnah?
Why these three?
Because these are the only three that have opinions in cases similar to this that seem to contradict our process. So, if there were fewer, there'd be fewer. If there were more, there'd be more. These are the three cases, and we're going to go through each of these three cases, and we're going to see how they present a law in a completely unrelated area of halacha, yet based on the way they say things there, you'd think, sure, this guy should have been in the Mishnah as a voice of dissent. That's what I mean, who authored the Mishnah. Was it really agreed upon universally? Or is it perhaps the opinion of somebody who remained anonymous for some strange reason? But even stranger is that the detractor is not mentioned. That doesn't make sense. If there's a different opinion, it should be mentioned in the Mishnah. So we're going to start our journey today with a sage called Ben Nanas. His full name is Rabbi Shimon Ben Nanas. And there are different reasons why people are mentioned by their father's name only and why their names are omitted. it's very interesting that a number of people who are called by their father's name only, their first name was Shimon. It's just interesting. So you have Ben Azai was Rabbi Shimon ben Azai. Ben Zoima was Rabbi Shimon ben Zoima. Okay? It's very interesting.
Why don't
That's,
they call him by Rabbi?
I said in each case, it's a different reason. In each case, it's a different reason. Ben Nanas, possibly the reason is that his father was very renowned for a particular story that happened to his father, which we're not going to do now. But he was a simple man, he was a butcher, and there's a whole story in his life, and probably that's the reason why his father gets the accolade over here. So Ben Nanas, as we're going to refer to him, is involved in a different discussion in a different Gemorah. The Gemorah is called Shavuos. A Shavuah is an oath. You can see the connection, yeah, because we're talking about administering an oath. So it does make sense that we're going to find a rabbi who's talking about laws surrounding oaths and make a comparison. That's logical. So there's quite a bit of information that we need in order to start this Gemorah. Number one, the first thing we're going to do is see the verse in the Torah that this entire conversation of Ben Nanas is based on. Then we're going to have to identify the law that he's speaking about. And then we're going to look at the case that Ben Nanas comments on. Once we have all of that information, then we're ready to learn this piece of Gemorah. So everything on page 10 is not in our Gemorah.
It's another Gemorah.
It's a different Gemorah from Shavuos that we are using to paint the background that will allow us to see what our Gemorah is trying to do. So we're going to start with a quotation. I'll read it first, then I'm going to ask you if you recognize this quotation at all. Loi sisa es shem Hashem Elokecha la shav. Does anybody recognize this?
Taken out in vain.
So where's it from? It's from the Ten Commandments, right? The Ten Commandments. So Loi sisa es shem Hashem Elokecha la shav. Do not take Hashem's name, the name of Hashem, your God, in vain. How do you take Hashem's name in vain?
You
I
don't.
think
The primary reference here in the Ten Commandments is taking a false oath. Because remember, to make an oath, you have to use Hashem's name. So if a person makes an oath that is a false oath, they have now taken Hashem's name in vain. Okay? How do you say oath in Hebrew? Shavuah. Okay, so you got the word over there. Not to be confused with the word that doesn't have a hey at the end. That means a week, like Shavua Tov. Right? This is Shavuah, not Shavuah. Okay, so a Shavuah is an oath. Now let's take that word, Shavuah, and the verse that we've just learned and put them together, and you get the phrase Shavuas Shav. Shavuas Shav. Let's try to put that together. We've got the word Shavuah, which we said is an oath. Shavuas Shav. An oath that takes Hashem's name in vain. An easier way to say that would be a false oath. Shavuas Shav. A false oath, but the very literal translation is an oath that takes Hashem's name in vain. Okay. Let's have a look at the Mishnah from the tractate Shavuos, where Ben Nanas features, that we're now going to compare to our Mishnah. Okay? You'll notice up here, I've just put the translation straight there in front of you because this is a reference point. It's not the Gemorah we're actually learning. But let's unpack it together. Kol anishboin shebetoira. All of the people that the Torah requires to take an oath. Now that's really insightful for us because that means that there are actually two kinds of oath. There is an oath that is required by the Torah, and there's an oath that is imposed by the rabbis. Okay? We're not going to talk today about oaths that are imposed by the rabbis. We're going to talk about an oath that is required by the Torah in this Mishnah. So, Kol HaNishbon Shebetorah, any person who is required to take an oath that is legislated by the Torah, Nishboin v'lo meshalmin. Then if they are willing to take that oath, they are exempt from payment. So let's understand what that typically means. I walk into the court and I say, Yankel owes me money. Okay? The court says, do you have a document, an IOU? I say, I don't. It was a verbal agreement. The court says, do you have witnesses? I say, I don't. He's my friend. I didn't even think that I needed witnesses. I just thought that, we have trust and I'll lend him money and he'll pay me back. What recourse what recourse do I have against Yankel, who I claim owes me money?
You don't.
Nothing. I have no recourse. Nothing I could do. Nothing I could do. See his word against mine. Nothing I could do. What happens if I come along and I say to the court, listen, Yankel owes me $10,000. Court says, Yankel, what do you say? He says, no, I only owe 5,000. Okay? That is an admission of partial guilt. Right? Now he is required by Torah law to swear that he does not owe me 10,000 as I've claimed.
If he says that I don't know anything.
If he says I don't know anything, it's his word against mine. Zero-sum game. But if I say to him, you owe me 10 grand, and he says I only owe 5 grand, oh, hang on a second. So you acknowledge you owe me. Now we're debating the amount, not the question of whether you owe me money. The Torah now says we impose an oath onto Yankel, and he has to swear that he only owes me 5 grand. Now, if he was stalling for time or whatever his motivation might have been not to acknowledge the full amount, that oath will squeeze it out of him. That's the whole idea. He gets up and he takes the oath. How much does he have to pay me now if he takes that oath? 5,000. 5,000. That's what he acknowledges. He's willing to swear to it. That's all he has to pay. That's what the Mishnah is saying. Nishboin. You take the oath that is administered. V'lo meshalmi. You don't have to pay anything beyond that oath.
Because there's no other witnesses or anything else.
Correct. That's one scenario. There are various other scenarios, but it doesn't matter. The point is, if a person takes an oath that excuses them from a payment, if you take the oath, you don't pay. If you pay, you don't have to take the oath. That's how it works. That's the whole mechanism of an oath. The purpose of the oath is to get the person to tell the truth. If he's willing to take the oath, we must accept that. And then he does not have to pay what's being demanded of him.
Why don't they both take an oath in the first place? If there's a zero-sum game.
Both take an oath. Why would you impose an oath if the result is anyway going to be a zero-sum game?
Saying, I don't, maybe, I'm saying, so I'm saying you owe me, you're saying,
No, I'm saying you owe me, you're saying you don't owe me.
Yes, so why don't we both take an oath?
Because taking an oath is an extremely serious thing, and the result of that is going to be what? The same thing. You're saying unless somebody gets cold feet. Unless somebody gets cold feet.
Yes.
I think it would be a ridiculous society if every time a person made a flippant claim against somebody, they had to go in front of the courts and swear an oath. I mean, it would be ridiculous.
So can I just
I feel like I want to get money. Let's try this and see if you're willing to take an oath. I know that you're a person who's very careful about using Hashem's name. Maybe I'll get some money. It's like a form of blackmail.
So, yeah, absolutely.
So what happens if he takes the oath and he's actually lying? And the court doesn't know. What happens?
But that's between him and Hashem. Okay. He's now taken Hashem's name in vain. Serious thing. And part of what they tell him is he's going to die prematurely and all kinds of stuff. But that's between him and Hashem. Okay. So then the Mishnah lists various examples of people who have to go through this process. One of those examples, which is the one we're interested in, that's why you'll see that I've skipped a whole bunch of the Mishnah over here. The one that is important for us is Chenveni al Pinkasoi. Mark, this one's for you.
Yeah, storekeeper.
Chenveni, the shopkeeper, and his ledger. Right? Chenveni al Pinkasoi. The shopkeeper and his ledger. Now the case we're about to read is going to be wild. You ready for this? Asks the Mishnah, what kind of scenario are we talking about where the shopkeeper with his ledger is going to be taking an oath? What are we talking about? Or somebody's going to be taking an oath. What are we talking about? So listen to the story. Oimer loy. Chaim walks into Mark's shop. It's actually not going to happen in Mark's shop because you sell the wrong product for this example. Okay, so Chaim walks into Yankel's shop and he says, Ten livni mosayim chitin. Do me a favor, give my son 200 zuz worth of wheat. Now we'll make the scenario a little bit clearer because you understand what's going on. I'm going away on business. I'm going to be away for a month. Over the course of that month, extend 100 zuz of credit, or in this case he says sosaim, not mosaim, sorry, sosaim. That's a measure of volume. So 2 sa'ah of wheat. You give that to my son over the course of the month. When I get back from my trip, I'll pay you. Another example. 10 lepoyali besela mo'ois. Or he says, you're a hardware supplier. I've got some contractors at my house. Let them come buy materials from you to this budget. And then you'll give me an invoice and I'll pay you. You ready for this? What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? Guy comes back from his business trip and he has a knock on his door. Hu oimer nosati. It's the shopkeeper to say, I did what you asked. I delivered the wheat. I delivered the building materials. Here's the invoice. Vehein ohimrim loi notalnu. Meantime, the son says, I did not get one bit of food from you for a month while I was away, and I had to go buy my own food, and now you owe me money for a month's worth of wheat. Or the building contractors come along and say, listen, we couldn't delay the project because you weren't here. The guy didn't give us any materials. We went out of pocket and bought our own materials and built your house. You owe us. So now he's got 2 claimants. He's got the one guy saying, I did what you said. Here's the bill. And the other guy saying, I don't know why you left us high and dry. You didn't give me what I needed. I had to lay out. So what's the halacha? The halacha, says the Mishnah, Hu nishba v'noitel. We tell the shopkeeper, okay, fine, please swear that what you're saying is true. He gets up, 10 fingers, he stands there with his Torah, does the whole thing, he swears, and now the uncle's got to pay him. Because he was willing to swear. V'hei nishboin v'noitlin. And the other party, either the son or the contractors, they swear in front of the Beis Din, and they get paid as well. In other words, this guy who thought he had a perfect system to keep everything moving while he was out of town, landed up costing himself 100% of what it should have, 100% extra of what it should have cost him. Right? Right? Now before you kick up a fuss, Omar ben Nanas. Here comes the part of the Mishnah that is what we're looking for. So Ben Nanas says, Ketzad, how on earth can you do that? How on earth can you do that? Elu ve'elu, both of these parties, boin lidei shvuas shav, are going to be making a false oath. Their claims are mutually exclusive. If the shopkeeper swears under oath that he paid what he was asked to pay, how then can other people be allowed to swear under oath that they didn't get it? And vice versa. If they're permitted to swear that they never received the money, how could you have allowed him to swear that he paid the money? How can you allow mutually exclusive oaths? This is Ben Nanas's big contention. Therefore, Elohu noitel sheloi bishvua. Therefore, Ben Nanas says, listen here, the shopkeeper cannot be out of pocket, so you've got to pay him, except he doesn't even have to take an oath to be paid. V'hei noitlin sheloi bishvua, and they, either the son or the contractors, they need to be compensated, so they've got to be paid, and they don't even have to take an oath. That's the opinion of Ben Nanas. My question to you is, with that information, how do you imagine Ben Nanas would react to our Mishnah?
He'd be happy. No, they did take an oath. They have to take an oath.
Our Mishnah says they have to take an oath. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Question is, how would Ben Nanas react?
Wouldn't be happy with them taking it.
Why not?
Because one of them would have to be almost a false oath.
So in his version over here, it's not that one is a false oath. In his version, they are both false oaths, right? And in our case, is that the same? Are they both false oaths?
One has to be true.
Not necessarily.
because they say at
Not
least
necessarily.
At least half.
Okay, that's correct. That's a very good observation. But one does not have to be true.
Well, they have the product. So
Okay, so it could be that they simultaneously picked it up, in which case neither version is true. Right? So it doesn't have to be.
But that one's easily resolved because you said 50-50.
Okay, so here's also here's 100-100. The question is not the payout. The question is the mechanism of the oath. Benanas is disturbed by the mechanism of the oath because you're making somebody lie under oath.
No, but the first one you split 50-50. Neither of them lose. They each gain 50. In the second one, the guy has to cough up twice. He loses.
Yes, agreed. So again, you're looking at the payout.
Yeah.
And obviously the two cases are very different in the payout. But Benanas is looking at where and when can you administer an oath. And he's saying, if this guy's statement contradicts that guy's statement, how can you possibly allow them to make that same statement under oath? In other words, you're forcing somebody to lie under oath. That's his problem with the scenario. You're forcing somebody to lie under oath.
It's his choice.
What, whether he's going to say it or not?
His choice to lie.
Okay, hang on a second. Sorry, one sec. His choice to lie. So what you're saying is the courts can have a mechanism that potentially allows somebody to transgress such a serious issue in Judaism, but it's your choice.
It's called escalating it up to God. Let go up to head office. Let head office.
Okay.
Part of what you're saying is that if the person believes in it and it's the oath or the threat of the oath or the false oath is so strong that it scares the person not to have a false oath, surely this is doing the same thing. So you're not forcing them to do it. I'm sort of backing up what he's saying.
So that's why we got to decouple these two concepts, right? Which means there's what the people will choose to do, and there's what the courts can present them as an option. The responsibility of the courts is to only present options that are completely halachically compliant. That's the responsibility of the court. The fact that the people might be scared off by the oath, that's what we're hoping. We're hoping the mechanism will scare them into telling us the truth. But we still have to offer a mechanism that is completely halachically compliant. Ben Nana says if you're offering a mechanism that potentially green lights them making statements under oath that are contradictory, that is not halachically compliant. The courts cannot be party to making somebody swear falsely. Now, if any time that a person takes an oath, they could swear falsely. I'm not creating that scenario. Here I'm accepting the possibility. I'm inviting them to take contradictory oaths. How can I do that with a clear conscience? I can't excuse myself as saying, well, they shouldn't do it. I'm the court. I am the arbiter of the highest level of observance of Torah and mitzvahs. I am the protector of the divine name in this particular case.
So that's
right?
That's why in the earlier case you're saying at least half of it is
good. I'm saying that's a very good observation. We're still going to come back to that. It's a very good observation, and it's the first time we're starting to get an inkling of why it's such a strangely worded oath. Good point. That's very much on point.
is the case different to our case?
The case is different, yes.
Because the contractual relationship between me and someone is mutually exclusive between me and the other person.
Yes.
Whereas our
example... Yes, very good observation. Very good observation. So the cases are not the same cases. And that's what we hope for, right? Because we want to show that this is a universally accepted principle. So at first glance, it looks like these two cases are really simple, and yet Bananas has a radically different view. If we can get to the point to say, no, the cases are not the same, that would help. That would resolve the issue. So yeah, definitely also on point. See, you learn Gemorah for a few weeks and you start thinking like Gemorah people. Okay? All right. You still look unsatisfied.
I'm trying to find a way to shopkeeper, the son, the father. How it's almost like playing three-card Monty. Like how do you move it around to get the parts to actually work? I'm trying to think of different scenarios.
Okay.
Okay,
no problem. So with that background information, let's have a look at what the Gemorah actually has to say on the subject. Now we're going to do it as follows. We're going to first go through the vocab, then we're going to go through some very important key phrases that are relevant not only to this piece, but some of them will be relevant to the next two pieces as well. And then we'll look at the actual Gemorah itself. So we're going to start with the word Ketzad, which might be familiar to you. We're on page 11 now. So we're going to start with the word Ketzad, which might be familiar from the song Ketzad Meraktin Lifnei Akala. Or it might be, yeah, exactly. That one. Where else do we? I'm trying to think. Where else do we have the word Ketzad? That's very, very common. I don't know. That's what came to mind. Ketzad meraktim lifnei akala. Okay. Does anybody know what the word means? Ketzad just simply means how. How. Not the Native American greeting. But the question word, how. Okay? Eilu ve'eilu. That's actually plural. These and those. That's the direct translation. Eilu ve'eilu. These and those. It's a useful expression. It's used in various ways throughout all Torah literature. Eilu ve'eilu. These and those. Okay. We have an extra line over there that you don't really need. Next word, if you can pronounce that word, that's also a good start. This is the second line, the word on the left. If you can Vadai. Okay, very good. Vadai. Right? So what does Vadai mean? Vadai? Certainly. It could also mean just certain. Right? In modern Hebrew, people say Bevadai, which means of course. Right, so Vada means certain. Ikka. It's not Eicha, no. Ikka, there is. Okay, there is. Now you might recall that we already had the word leka, which is the antonym. Leka, there is not. Ikka, there is. See what happened over here. The two words got shifted down somehow. Okay. So let's do the word lidei. Lidei.
Two something.
Two, correct. What's yedei?
No.
Yedei. To the hands. So the literal translation would be lidei, to the hands. But in context, what it means is lidei, into a scenario or situation of. That's actually what it means. Right? Yovoi lidei, a person will come to a situation of, or come to circumstances of. Hadi hadodi. Sounds like a tongue twister. Hadi hadodi. Now, again, if you're familiar with modern Hebrew, you'll know that in modern Hebrew they use the word hadadi quite a lot, actually. It means mutual. But here, hadi hadodi means together or simultaneously. Simultaneous is probably the better word. Hadi hadodi, simultaneously. And then we have the root gimel base hay. Gimel base hay, the root. Okay, this is interesting because in Hebrew the word means high. Gavoa is high. So hagba, it's from this word. Hagba means to lift. But in Gemorah context, the word gova means to take a payment or to charge somebody. Okay? So if you think about it, you're kind of lifting the cash out of their wallet. Okay? In our case here, we're not going to see it in the classic Gemorah sense. We're going to see it in the original sense. Hagba, lifting up. Okay, so here's going to be lifting up. Okay, so the first phrase that we have to be familiar with, which is going to be relevant for the next three sections, is Leima masnisin deloi ke. Okay, Leima, let us say, masnisin, our Mishnah, deloi ke, does not follow so-and-so's opinion. And so that's exactly what we're saying. We're saying it would appear that so-and-so does not agree with this universal principle that we believe is the principle of our Mishnah. How come his name is not mentioned in the Mishnah? Okay? But you don't stop there. You don't just say, Leima Masnisin Deloike, we think that this Mishnah does not suit so-and-so's opinion. We then have to illustrate why we think that way. So we continue. We say, De'i, because if it were, and then of course in the middle we'll say, if it were like his opinion, Ha Omar, did he not say? So the flow is going to be like this. Let's say that our Mishnah Benanas does not follow the view of Benanas. Benanas, because if you want to think that Benanas agrees with our Mishnah, Ha Omar, did he not say X, which is different to our Mishnah? Ika lemeimar. Ika lemeimar, literal translation, there is to say. Ika lemeimar means there is an explanation. Let me explain to you why even Benanas would fit with our Mishnah. So Ika lemeimar, you can explain it as follows. And then an extremely, extremely common phrase. Hasam ... Hacha ... Hasam means there. Hacha means here. The Gemorah will use that to answer this kind of apparent contradiction. Hasam there, the case is talking about something. Hacha here, the case is talking about something else. The only time that somebody could have a contradictory view is if they're talking about the same thing and giving a different ruling. But if they're talking about something different and giving a different ruling, well then, that's not a problem. So for example, Hasam there, when the rabbi was driving on Shabbos, there was a case of danger to life. Hacha here, in our conversation where we speak about the broad prohibition against driving on Shabbos, we're not talking about a case of threat to life. Okay, so there'd be a Hasam, Hacha way of answering a question. Okay, now we have all the pieces of the puzzle. We have the background with Benanas. We have all the language that we need. Let's read the actual Gemorah. So the Gemorah begins with this question. No, this is now our Gemorah. We're back in our Gemorah. Okay? Says the Gemorah, I have a question. Leimo masnisin deloi kevenanos. How do you translate that? Leimo masnisin deloi kevenanos. Let us say that our Mishnah does not agree with the view of Benanas. Why would we think that's the case? De'i Benanas. Because if it were Benanas speaking, Ha Omar, doesn't he say in that Mishnah in Shavuos, in the case of the guy who asked the store owner to please pay his son or give his workers materials, in that case, didn't Benanas say, Ketzad, how could you possibly administer those two oaths? Because because by administering an oath to two different people who have contradictory claims, you're forcing one of them to lie under oath. Now, is that not the same here? It's two people who have contradictory claims. How can you apply an oath to them? Surely you're forcing somebody to lie. That's why the Gemorah believes that this Mishnah is incompatible with Benanas' philosophy. That's the question. Answers the Gemorah. Afilu. What's afilu? What's afilu?
I'm going to say answer.
If, I don't know.
You have it in Pesach. Afilu. Right? What is afilu? Afilu is even. Afilu, you could even. Tamar. I think we had the word Tamar before. That's why I didn't put it here. Did we not have it before? Tamar means say. More specifically, you can say, or you say, or you could say. Safilu Tamar Benanas. You could even say that our Mishnah works with Benanas and his views. Not an issue. How so? How so? Because Hasamacha, because there and here we're talking about completely different scenarios, completely different issues, The issue there would be a problem of potentially lying under oath. The issue here would not be a problem of potentially lying under oath. Why not? Look what he says. Hassam, in that case, Vadai, what's Vadai? Certainly, definitely. Ikar, there is Shavua Shav, a false oath. Why is it that definitely there's a false oath over there? Because they are mutually exclusive claims. You cannot tell me that the shopkeeper actually paid them and they actually didn't get the money. That's not possible. So they're mutually exclusive claims. So therefore, Benanas objects to this concept because how can you make them take an oath? He's going to swear he paid and they're going to swear they didn't receive. That's outright that somebody's lying. Whereas Hacha, here in our case, Ika lemeimar, Ika there is lemeimar to say. So you could say, de, what's de? That, leka, there is not Shavua Shav. There is not a false oath. Why is there not a false oath, potentially in our case? Because Amor, what's the root of that word? Amor? Amar. So we will say, Amor, we will say in our analysis of the case, de, that, travaihu, we have had this word before. Travaihu comes from the root trey. So travaihu, the two of them, bahadi hadadi. What's hadi hadadi? Simultaneously, agba'uha. There's your word, hagba. They both picked it up. In other words, the only time you have to, in Ben Nanas' view, the only time you have to stop the Beis Din from administering an oath is if there's no alternative but the fact that it's a mutually exclusive claim. In other words, there's no way that he paid and they didn't receive. Somebody's got to be lying. In our case, when the guy says, I found it and I found it, it is possible that nobody's lying. It is possible that they actually picked it up simultaneously. So it's not a definite false oath, and therefore we can administer the oath. Okay? So what have we done? We have addressed the fact that the Mishnah is supposed to be universal. We've questioned that fact by saying, look, doesn't look like it's universal. There's Ben Nanas who seems to have a very different opinion. And then we've illustrated, yes, he had a different opinion in a very different case. A case that it is inescapable that there's a lie floating around in those claims. In our case, there could be a genuine mistake. So that's good. That resolves that one. We have two more to do. We have two other sages. We're not doing them tonight, obviously, but we have two other sages who also, in different contexts, in other scenarios, seem to make statements that seem to contradict our philosophy of our Mishnah. We're going to have to do the same process with them, meaning we'll have to read the background, learn the background case, propose the question, and then answer the question. What's going to make next week more fun is that we're not quoting one opinion, because here we quoted one opinion even though there were two, right? There was the first opinion of the Mishnah and then Ben Nanas who argued. In the next case we're going to quote, there is the first opinion of the Mishnah, then the rabbi who argues, and the Gemorah, instead of just answering the question, is going to say, oh, and are you suggesting that the rabbis, plural, in that Mishnah don't have a problem with our Mishnah? In other words, you're identifying one guy as the problem. Actually, it sounds like everybody in that Mishnah would disagree with our Mishnah. So it's going to be a little bit more elaborate next time. But it's the same basic process that we're going to go through.